Well, June is Pride Month, and I thought it'd be good to sit down and talk with you today. For everybody who doesn't know, Rich Madaleno is our county's Chief Administrative Officer and the first openly gay CAO in the state of Maryland, following on being the first openly gay person in the state legislature. And you've been a fighter in the lead for LGBTQ plus rights from your days in the state Senate, as well as during your run for the governor. And you have a history that I'm sure makes you very proud, and I'm really happy to have you serving in my administration, and just want to give you a little chance to talk about this, a Gay Pride Month, and you've certainly been a significant leader in the state. So well, where do we go?
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Those remarks were very kind of you, and it's always been a pleasure to be a resident of Montgomery County when it comes to these issues, because we have definitely been a leader within the state, within the nation, on equality for LGBTQ plus people. And make no mistake, you've been there all the way. I mean, from your days on the Takoma Park City Council, when Takoma Park was, a leader on this issue, an outlier on this issue, going back to the 80s and 90s, to your service on the county council, your efforts to make sure, working with so many other people in this community, that Montgomery County would have a blowout victory for marriage equality on question 6 in 2012. It's been impressive to think back over just these few short years. In the year 2000, not that long ago, the only mention of gay people in the state code was to criminalize our existence. Here we are, 23 short years, and we've moved light years in advancement. It was thanks to the people of Montgomery County. I mean, that's the elected leadership, just the citizens, the residents and voters of Montgomery County overwhelmingly have continually supported this movement and propelled our county, our state, and our nation forward.
You mentioned Takoma Park. We started with legislation to recognize domestic partnerships, and we were confronted with a situation where people that a lot of us knew had partners who had gotten sick and wound up in a hospital. And they had the experience of, say, a parental member like a mother or father telling the hospital that you can't let that person's partner in here because they're not part of a family. And so we decided we'd allow the domestic partnerships, because that gave it an official sanction and recognition to this being this being a legitimate family unit. For my part, I have never understood, since the time I was a kid, why people even care about this. This is like people's perfect right to be whoever they are, and why people get all wound up over people being gay or not gay. It's like, what's the big deal, folks? You all look the same to me.
Well, and someone whose life we've celebrated this year, Sheila Hickson, longtime member of the House of Delegates from Takoma Park, Silver Spring, a true leader on this issue. I think the first time she put in the anti-discrimination bill at the state level, she was the only sponsor. Wow. Now you would probably wind up with more than 100 co-sponsors in the House of Delegates for that type of legislation. I remember in 2004, as a member of the House of Delegates, working with Montgomery County legislators, John Herson, who was a delegate and then majority leader at that time, and Delegate Ann Kaiser, who's still a member of the House representing the 14th District, so Olney, Burtonsville, Damascus. I remember Ann and I working on this bill that came about because a couple from California had come to Maryland. They were just on a drive around the country. One of the two guys did have a chronic illness. They had every document that you needed then. The power of attorney, the living will, all of those things with them. One falls ill in Harford County. They're taken to a hospital in Harford County. As his illness worsens, he's transported by helicopter to shock trauma to the University of Maryland Medical System in Baltimore. His partner at the time drives to Baltimore. All the paperwork left at the hospital in Bel Air, and they wouldn't let him in to see his partner as he lay dying. And he spent the last few hours of his life alone with his partner just on the other side of the door, but the hospital wouldn't let him in. That was 2003. It's hard to imagine a hospital being so cold to say no. Where's the paperwork? Prove who you are. It's because we've stood up in Maryland, so many different people, to say that was wrong, that we've changed it and moved it forward to full marriage equality for same-gender couples.
It is hard to imagine. I mean, you would think that organizations like a hospital would have natural empathy, that they'd understand the importance of, being with somebody, particularly in their worst and most difficult moments, and to put blinders on and just kind of say, well, but this relationship's not legitimate. I mean, who's to say what relationship's legitimate?
Yeah.
And why do people feel the need to do that?
Which is why it's so great that so many people in this community have been willing to ask those questions and to make changes. Not just ask the questions, not just sit back and say, I think this is wrong, but actually take affirmative action to change it at the municipal level, at the county level, and then at the state level. And then, our work on marriage equality in Maryland, I always want to remind people, our work in Maryland, the fact that we were the first state to pass this through the legislature, then the first state to get it approved by the voters, that it was a couple from Ohio that came to Maryland because they couldn't get married in Ohio. They came to Maryland to get married and then went back to Ohio when, again, Ohio would not recognize that relationship. They went to court. The Obergefell decision, as it's known, is the court case that said actually marriage equality for same-gender couples is the law for the entire country. So that effort our effort in Maryland did transform the entire country on marriage equality. But we were ahead on adding sexual orientation to the anti-discrimination law, then adding gender identity to the anti-discrimination law in Montgomery County first, and then statewide. I mean, across the board, many of the policies that originated here moved to the state and have moved to most of the country, if not all of the country, because of the good work and the long support here. And it's in our DNA in Montgomery County. I don't think people realize that in the 1960s, when civil rights around race was the major issue, there was a referendum on adding discrimination in public accommodations and housing, and making sure that racial discrimination in public accommodations like a restaurant, a movie theater, and housing would be against the law in Maryland. That got petitioned to referendum, and that failed in most of the state. It passed overwhelmingly in Montgomery County and became the law of the land because of that. So Montgomery County is on the forefront of issues of social justice and equality on issue after issue, and for decades.
I think, of how much Montgomery County's changed. I use this statistic for, being a 95% white county in 1970 and, now being 44%. And that we've managed this remarkable change with the diversity of people coming here. And it's been done as if this was just normal.
Yes.
And that we don't get a lot of pushback out of that. There are always some people who will push back against anything that's different, but most people are just kind of like, well, that's just who we are. And most people are proud and happy that you can say that your kids go to school with all kinds of different people, and it's just part of the normal complex. But I wonder, when we did our bill at the city level, we got some pushback, but it was not, I wouldn't say it was extraordinarily difficult. I think none of us were worried about, oh my God, we're going to do this and what's going to happen in the next election. I'm just wondering, like, from where you sat in the state legislature, what was it like going from 0 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour? How did that transformation take place, and how did you feel amidst all that?
Well, for a long time, I thought it wouldn't happen, and we were playing defense. I mean, when I was first in the legislature, it was about stopping the negative constitutional amendment from going on the ballot. We probably all remember in 2004, the George W. Bush campaign for re-election pushes these constitutional amendments around the country. There was a big push in Maryland to get that done. And so our work initially was, how do we stop this from occurring? And then it was interesting, we were able to move the conversation away from defense to offense. And I remember the advice that Brian Frosch, then a state senator from Montgomery County, then most recently the last 8 years our attorney general in Maryland until just recently retiring, Brian saying to me, in his time in the legislature, he always saw that the pivot came so fast, that you'd be sitting year after year fighting that uphill battle, and then all of a sudden it would change dramatically. And it was just like that. Just a momentum occurred right after the 2010 state election, and things just changed. And part of it was Martin O'Malley was willing to push it and stand up and fight as governor. And just like Paris Glendenning had stood up and fought for the anti-discrimination law as governor. If I can tell a little story about Governor Glendenning, I think one of the moving moments that really started to change people's minds in the legislature about the anti-discrimination bill, he had a younger brother who died of HIV/AIDS. The governor went to visit him in the hospital as he lay dying. And his brother said to him, he had been an Air Force officer, a decorated Air Force officer, and then forced out of the military. And he said, even though HIV/AIDS and all of the health complications that came with it, which led to his passing, was painful and debilitating, it was nothing like the pain that he suffered each day in silence as having to serve in the closet in the United States Air Force. And he asked Governor Glendenning if he ever had the chance to make sure other people didn't feel that same pain, he needed to take it. That's why Governor Glendenning pushed forward with that anti-discrimination law, and why he was successful in it, and that changed the hearts and minds of people to hear those sorts of stories. And that's, and anyone would be fearful of. And I remember actually when I walked into this building, even though I knew Montgomery County had rules and laws, as a young person starting to work for the county in 1995, I was worried what would happen to me, what would be my career opportunities if it was discovered I was gay. It took a long time to come out here. I think that's changed dramatically. I think people are comfortable walking in to this building as an employee on their first day, putting a picture of them with their same gender spouse and their family on the desk, and everyone smiles and says, "Nice to meet you." So it's been that sort of transformation within this organization that I know I'm proud of. I'm sure you're proud of. Because it's more common than it was, but we were a leader in that sort of welcoming environment.